لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Welcome you back to our course on Imam al-Hadrami's Safinat Al Naja. This is lesson 14 in our series bi'idhnillah ta'ala, and bi'idhnillah our course outcomes remain the same. So as we proceed, we will continue to have an introduction to Islamic law in this course, a first step into the legacy of the Shafi'i school, and learn the 5 pillars of Islam at a beginner level. In this lesson, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, we focus specifically on the 14 nullifiers or mubtilatus salah, those factors which would cause one's salah to become invalid. We look at the rawatib or the voluntary prayers connected to the obligatory prayers. And we also look at some additional voluntary prayers. However, we will not have an exhausted list of this. With that, we commence with the Quran. قال الله عز وجل بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فإذا قضيتم when you conclude or complete الصلاة, your pray, فاذكروا الله, then remember Allah, قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبكم, standing and seated and upon your sides. فإذا اطمأننتم, then when you are secure, فأقيموا الصلاة, establish the prayer. إن الصلاة, indeed the prayer, كانت على المؤمنين, is for the believers, كتابا موقوتا, by an appointed time, meaning they are at prescribed times. Again, the translation: when the prayers are over, when you have concluded your prayers, remember Allah whether you are standing, sitting or lying down. But when you are secure, establish regular prayers. Indeed, performing prayers is a duty on the believers at the appointed times. Surah An-Nisa, verse number 103. This allows me an opportunity to comment on the purpose of our salah. It's important that as we learn and study Islamic law, right, legal theory and law, both usul al-fiqh as well as fiqh, that we always connect the attainment of knowledge along with the deeper, broader picture of why we are learning. Why do we learn about the prayer? The primary reason is not to become an alim, not to just know. It's not knowing for the sake of knowing. Primarily, we learn for the sake of practice, in order to ensure that our prayer is conducted in the best possible way. And this is why the virtue of an alim over an abid, or a scholar over a worshipper, is like the virtue of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ over everybody else. It's not just for the sake of knowing, but with the intent to practice. So as we learn Islamic law, it's essential for us to understand that this is for a higher purpose, and that is to connect us with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our 5 daily prayers as a whole is a system of always being in the remembrance of Allah. As we start the day, we start with Fajr, and we are conscious of Allah as the first point of duty in the day. Of course, even more ideal than that would be Tahajjud. And then we proceed with our day, and we find ourselves slipping and falling into the dunya and being trapped until we reach Salatul Dhuhr. And then once again, we are rejuvenated spiritually and connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We proceed with the rest of our day, and we come across another time where we become tired and preoccupied. And behold, we find ourselves with Salatul Asr. And we once again rejuvenate our spirituality and our taqwa, our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so through the day. If you are punctual on your prayers and you give your prayers the legal and spiritual attention that it deserves, the result is that you are always in a state of the remembrance of Allah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us that. With that we proceed. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Faslun في مبطلات الصلاة, a chapter regarding the nullifiers of the prayer. تبطل الصلاة ب14 خصلة. The prayer is nullified by 14 factors. بالحدث, breaking one's wudu. So ritual impurity, breaking one's wudu in one form or the other. وبوقوع النجاسة, when one comes into contact with filth. إن لم تلق حالا, unless it is discarded immediately. من غير حمل, without having to carry it. So the first point is clear. If you break your wudu, your salah is invalidated immediately, in whichever form you break your wudu. The second point is, if some najasa falls onto your person, that would nullify your prayer, unless you are able to instantaneously remove it from your person. An example I can think of is perhaps a dead creature falls onto your person while you are praying. So that would be najis. If you are able to remove that najasa by perhaps flicking it away or shaking it off or dropping it down in any form that does not involve you having to carry it, and you do so immediately, right, then your prayer is still valid. But if you hesitate, or if removing it involves carrying it, that would still nullify your prayer, and Allah Ta'ala knows best. What I mean by if you hesitate, if the najasa remains on your person for longer than what we would consider to be a moment or a sakta or a moment of subhanallah, then that would nullify the prayer, and Allah knows best. Number 3, exposing the awrah, exposing the awrah if it was not covered immediately. A solid example of this is the man who prays in a pants and a shirt, and he goes into sajda and his backside becomes exposed. If that becomes exposed and he closes it immediately, his prayer is valid. But if it doesn't become, if he is not aware of it immediately, or he doesn't close it immediately, then his prayer is invalid because his awrah is exposed. And that's one example, of course, but that's quite a common one. Number 4, intentionally uttering 1 or 2 letters which can be clearly understood. Intentionally uttering either 1 or 2 letters that can be clearly understood, meaning so it conveys a meaning, right? If you look at footnote number 63, the salah is invalidated when 2 or more letters worth of sounds such as laughter, crying, groaning, clearing the throat, blowing, sighing or similar are audible. If the need to cough arises involuntarily, a person should try his utmost to suppress it. However, if after trying hard the need still subsists, he may cough for relief, even if a sound or 2 or more syllables is formed. So it's quite a strict approach, and if that's a bit too strict for some people, it develops waswasa in them. I would then recommend that they opt for a lighter view in this regard. But generally speaking, it means don't make sounds unnecessarily if you are making those sounds intentionally and there's no need to make them, right? That's the real point in this. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Then to forgetfully eat a lot, right? To forgetfully eat a lot. So if you forgetfully eat a little, some morsel or some speck of food is prominent in the mouth, and you forgetfully eat that, there's no harm in that. But if you forgetfully eat a lot, so there's an entire morsel of food in your mouth, and then you eat that during the salah, that would nullify your prayer. Then 3 consecutive motions, even if involuntarily. Now, here again, many people become confused thinking that is 3 motions or is 3 motions. No, what is being referred to here is 3 distinct major motions. For example, this, and this. That's 3 motions. Now, of course, that's an exaggerated example. It could also be this, and this. You just move around like that. If it's done consecutively, that would break your prayer. But if a person moves, for example, they need to switch their cell phone off, and they move by doing this, dropping their hand, then placing their hand in their pocket, then moving to switch the phone off, and it's not done consecutively, then this would be fine. Of course, you should not move unnecessarily, But when the need arises to fill the saf in front of you, for example, there's a way to do that where you are not moving consecutively, so your salah is not being broken, and that's how you should ideally move, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The other thing is, if you move, for example, to scratch your nose, right? So you moved like that and you put your hand back, that's considered one movement, right? That's considered one movement. So it's actually quite simple, or straightforward, I should say, and you shouldn't be developing any form of waswasa based on this, right? If you're moving that much that you are thinking that your salah is being invalidated thereby, you shouldn't be moving that much in the first place. So don't allow any waswasa to develop from this, and Allah knows best. An extra movement that is contrary to the habit of a sane person, like randomly just picking up your leg and putting it down, or just jumping up and down. So some random excessive movement like that. Similarly, number 9, an excessive strike of the hand. Let's say you are swatting away a fly, but instead of just doing that, you karate chop the fly, so the fly just wants to drop down or something. That would break the prayer, even though it's one movement. Number 10, to intentionally add an extra physical integral of the prayer. To intentionally add, that would break the prayer. Obviously, if you do so by mistake, you don't even know that you're doing it, so that doesn't have any effect. Then to precede the imam in 2 physical integrals of the salah, and these are long integrals. Now the details of what I'm mentioning is here in the footnotes, so I'm just going through them concisely, inshallah ta'ala. If you go ahead from the imam, so the imam is still in qiyam and you go into ruku, and the imam is still in qiyam and you come up from ruku, now you don't count the i'tidal, which is coming up from the ruku. Why? Because that's a short integral. But you count the ruku. Then you go into sajda, the imam is still standing, right? If you come up from sajda, then you completed 2 long integrals. If the imam is still standing and you came up from sajda already, your prayer is invalidated. So this is how you need to be careful not to precede the imam. You shouldn't precede the imam. It's against the law to precede the imam. But if you do, and it's just one preceding action, your salah is still valid. But if you precede him with 2 physical integrals, not short ones, but 2 full integrals, then your prayer is invalid, and Allah knows best. To delay the 2 integrals without an excuse. Similarly to preceding the imam, there's also keeping back from the imam without an excuse. So if the imam goes into ruku, you're still standing. The imam comes up, goes down into sajda, you're still standing. If he comes back up from sajda, right, and you're still standing and you don't have an excuse, then your prayer is invalidated. But if you had an excuse, for example, you are struggling to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, so you were still busy with your recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha, that's a valid excuse for still standing or for still delaying behind the imam, even though it is 2 full integrals, and Allah knows best. Number 13, the intention of terminating the salah by suspending its termination on a foreign action. So you say, for example, look, I'm expecting an important phone call from work, but I need to pray my salah. I'm going to pray, but if the phone rings, I'm going to break my prayer to answer the phone. That prayer is invalid from the get-go, because you are suspending the validity of that prayer on something that is extraneous, and you shouldn't be doing that, and Allah knows best. Moving on from that, number 14, by doubting its termination. Should I break my salah? Shouldn't I break my salah? Did I break my salah? Didn't I break my salah? That's major waswasa there. If something like that starts happening to you, just break off the salah, start praying again, and then be careful of shaitan. Seek refuge from shaitan. I'm finding that waswasa, OCD or religious scrupulosity, is a growing phenomenon. I can't quite explain why it is so widespread, but it's affecting so many people. If this is you, trust me when I say studying more fiqh is not going to resolve your answer as much as you think that it would. What you need to do is treat the root of the cause, and it is a spiritual come psychological issue. Whether you are more affected spiritually or psychologically, you need to treat it accordingly. So seek the necessary assistance, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So the footnotes are there for you. We won't go through that together. We've explained them in our elaboration of the points. Now we proceed to the next part of the dars, which discusses the sunnahs before and after the obligatory prayers. Sunan rawatib. Now the word rawatib, from the word rataba, which means to put something in order, refers to the sunan that form before and after the obligatory salah. So they give us the sequence or the order of prayer for the 5 daily prayers. Now, in terms of the rawatib, we generally study the optimal and the minimal, right? That's generally what we study. However, it is important for us to understand the more the merrier, right? So even though we often only do that which is minimal, when it comes to our prayer, naturally the more the merrier. In terms of practice, my suggestion would be for a person struggling with a relationship with Allah, their first priority, there is no other way, they must ensure the 5 obligatory prayers first. So only the fard prayers, and make sure that they become consistent upon that. Then they should add, according to their capability, more and more of the sunan until they are praying all of the sunan in the most optimum way with extra voluntary prayers as well. That is a journey for each and every one of us to take according to our growth. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us and accept. We proceed bi'idhnillah. So the sunan rawatib, the sunnah before and after the fard salah. The optimal numbers of these are 2 raka'at before subh salah or before fajr. These are considered highly emphasized and shouldn't be omitted except for absolute necessity, right? In the Hanafi school, if I'm not mistaken, these are considered wajib, right? Just like the witr prayer. 4 raka'at before as well as 4 raka'at after the dhuhr salah. Unfortunately, most people are only ever exposed to 2 raka'at before and 2 raka'at after, but the full and the optimum sunan is to do 4 and 4 after. 4 before and 4 after. 4 raka'at before asr salah. Similarly, from my experience, most people know about 2, but 4 before asr would be the optimal. Now here it's mentioned that 2 raka'at after maghrib salah, and that's a standard. But many scholars, based on hadith evidence, also hold it to be sunnah to recite 2 raka'at before maghrib salah as well, though they always mention that this is ghayr mu'akkada, that it would be done sometimes and they would omit it at times. So sometimes it's not much of a feature, people don't know about it, and other times people make provision for it. And if I'm not mistaken, some scholars also don't regard it as sunnah at all, so they don't pray during that time. If I'm not mistaken, I think the Hanafi school does not regard it as being a sunnah to read 2 raka'at before maghrib salah, but for Shafi'is, it is sunnah to do so. So if the opportunity arises, do take it, but you also don't need to make any fuss about it if somebody sort of doesn't know about it or finds it strange that you are doing so. Brief explanation suffices, inshallah. Later on in the level 2, level 3 courses, when you start tackling adilla in greater depth, you will come to find out the reason for these differences, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Then we proceed to Isha. 2 rak'at after Isha Salah, just like 2 rak'at after Maghrib Salah. And then, of course, in addition to the Isha Sunnahs is the Witr prayer, which we'll discuss a little later. Then we look at the Sunnah Mu'akkada, which is what more people are familiar with, the emphasized Sunnah. So these are actually included within these. These are the optimal numbers, and these are the minimal numbers contained within them, right? So here we're going to obviously mention less. 2 rak'at before Fajr Salah, right? It's also considered Mu'akkada. 2 rak'at before and after Dhuhr Salah, Mu'akkada. 2 rak'at after Maghrib Salah, notice nothing for Asr, but 2 rak'at after Maghrib Salah, considered Mu'akkada. 2 rak'at after Isha Salah, considered Mu'akkada. It is recommended to pray 2 rak'at before Maghrib Salah as discussed, And the sunan of Jumu'ah are the same as for Dhuhr Salah, though there's also evidence that one can pray as many raka'at for Jumu'ah as one so desires. So you may pray 4 before, 4 after, 6, 8, etc. It's a day of ibadah, so the more the merrier, as we said previously. Now that was the discussion on the rawatib, and there are other discussions as well, but that suffices as an introduction. We now move on to our discussion of the witr prayer. And witr literally means that which is odd, an uneven number. And a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ informs us that Allah is witrun, Allah is an odd number, meaning Allah is one. Yuhibbul witra, and Allah loves that which is odd in number. So the sunnah is that whenever we have to choose a number, opt for the odd numbers, because that would be the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ based on this phenomenon. So the witr prayer rounds off our daily prayers and turns it into an odd number. That's why witr essentially has an odd number of raka'at. Had it not been for the witr, we would have even numbers. And in the Hanafi school, witr is regarded once again as wajib. In the Shafi'i school, it is regarded as an emphasized sunnah. But as a Shafi'i, one should be cognizant of the fact that if you were a Hanafi, you would be sinning for not praying witr salah. So, khurujan min al-khilaf, it's best to always pray witr salah, and Allah knows best. How should it be prayed? What is it? Let's have a look. The final salah at night. The best time for witr is after the sunnah salah of Isha, unless one intends to offer the tahajjud prayer. Meaning that if you intend to offer the tahajjud prayer, it would be better to go and sleep, wake up, pray tahajjud, then pray witr, and that would be the last prayer for the night. Otherwise, if you know that this is not going to happen, or if you're probably going to miss it, in that case, it's best to pray after the sunnahs of Isha. Witr is a minimum of 1 raka'ah, although it is considered makruh to limit yourself to only 1 as a habit. And the optimal is to perform 11 raka'at, right, for witr prayer. 3 raka'at, however, is considered the minimal optimal. So that's like the standard practice, 2 plus 1, right? The minimal optimal number of raka'at. And one separates them by completing 2 raka'at with salam and then performs the final raka'ah. One recites Surah Al-A'la in the first raka'ah and Al-Kafirun in the second raka'ah and Al-Ikhlas, Falaq and Nas in the third raka'ah after Surah Al-Fatiha respectively. Now, of course, there are many other sunan and discussions about the witr prayer, kunut in the witr prayer, the different formats of praying witr prayer, what to recite after the witr prayer. There are many, but as an introduction for level 1, this suffices bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We proceed to the next voluntary prayer, the Taraweeh Salah. It is sunnah to perform Taraweeh. Taraweeh is a word that wasn't known in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a formal name for this type of salah. It would be Qiyamul Layl, to be praying at night during the month of Ramadan. There was no special name given to it. But there was the performance of prayer at night with the Sahaba. There's some history to that and the manner that it occurred in. And in the time of the Sahaba, especially in the time of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, he then gathered the Sahaba and all of the believers to pray at night in Ramadan behind one Imam and with 20 raka'at of prayer. So based on this, it is considered sunnah to pray 20 raka'at of a group prayer in each night of the month of Ramadan. And all 4 schools of thought, the predominant view agrees that 20 raka'at is the optimal number there. However, there's lots of different views because it's such a flexible prayer that scholars went into saying 40 raka'at or as many raka'at as you'd like. And of course, there's also the modern day ikhtilaf where some opine that it should ideally be 8 raka'at and that the Prophet ﷺ prayed 8 raka'at and never went beyond that. So there's some scholarly discussions there. But as far as the 4 schools of thought are concerned, the predominant views therein is that it is 20 raka'at and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. especially about sunnah praise like Taraweeh, it should not become a cause of dispute and fighting among the Muslims. If some people insist that they want to pray 8, alhamdulillah, they're praying 8 rak'at of Salah. If some people insist that it must be 20 because the madhahib state that it's 20, they're absolutely right. But in terms of our tolerance with one another, it is better to have a brother and sister praying 8 rak'at than not praying at all. And this is the approach we should generally have, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. We continue inshallah ta'ala to the next one, which is about Salatul Duha. We said we're not going to have an exhaustive list, but we'll include as many as we can. The mid-morning prayer, it is sunnah to pray the Duha Salah, the mid-morning prayer, which is a minimum of 2 rak'at. Its optimum is 8 rak'at, and it has a maximum of 12 rak'at. One completes a pair of rak'ahs with salam after each. Of course, we also know about the tahajjud prayer, which is a supererogatory prayer at night, is an emphasized sunnah. In fact, it was obligatory for the Prophet ﷺ. Even if one can only do a little, the last part of the night is the best time to offer tahajjud salah. Now, as difficult as this is to say and to remember and to bring into our attention, but the reality is the following. The pious among this ummah have attained piety with certain tools. And some tools were universally accessed by all of the pious in the past and in the present and till the day of Qiyamah. And to ignore these tools and still expect to attain piety is foolish. What were these tools? Let's remind ourselves quickly. And of course, now we're not speaking about the fara'id and staying away from haram, because that's obligatory, that's fard, that's for every Muslim. I'm speaking about beyond staying away from haram and doing what is the bare minimum of obligatory acts. What are the tools that the pious utilize and rely upon to reach the maqam that they have reached? One of those tools is undoubtedly pray in the middle of the night or pray when others are asleep. Generally speaking, you would find that the truly pious have a basic, straightforward act. They occasionally increase, like in Ramadan, special occasions when they have a deep need, then you find them praying longer. But their standard practice, 2 rak'at, 4 rak'at, but they do it consistently every night. And then from there, they proceed to the masjid and they maybe fast for the rest of the day. This is, subhanAllah, that's piety, especially when it also reflects in their akhlaq. But what we also find is that they are consistent with the Quran, right? Recitation and reflection on the Quran is one of those tools. And you find that, as I said, they fast then on that day. So fasting, voluntary fast, especially Mondays and Thursdays, these are the tools of piety of those who attained piety. The same tools are accessible to us. The difference between ourselves and them is that they actually use the tools. We often neglect these tools. So tahajjud, recitation of the Quran, regular sunnah fasting, praying at the masjid, especially for the males, sadaqah. These are tools that they wove into their lives, became part of who they are and their identity, and they never look back, and it always benefited them. May Allah make us of them. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. We proceed. The last part of the night is the best time to offer tahajjud salah. So even if you wake up a few minutes before fajr and you manage to pray 2 rak'at, that still is considered tahajjud. The next salah being mentioned here is tahiyyatul masjid, or greeting the mosque. It is sunnah for the one who enters a masjid to greet the masjid by praying 2 rak'at each time he enters. One is no longer entitled to pray it after sitting down. Tamam? Once you sit, then your opportunity for tahiyyatul masjid has come to an end. But with tahiyyatul masjid, there's also the opportunity for tadakhul, which means that if you come in the masjid, for as long as you didn't sit, whatever prayer you pray, fard or sunnah, you can automatically attain tahiyyatul masjid by the mere fact of not having sat down before you prayed. Okay? So this is actually why when you enter the masjid and the adhan is sounding, you find people stand, they don't pray salah, but they stand, they also don't sit down. The purpose for that is not standing out of respect for the adhan, as some people may think, but instead so that you can attain tahiyatul masjid. And Allah knows best. I leave you with a question, inshallah ta'ala. According to the 4 schools of thought, how many units of prayer does the Taraweeh prayer have? You should be able to answer that by now, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. Until next time, this is the lesson summary, the 14 nullifiers of the prayer, the rawatib voluntary prayers, some additional voluntary prayers. That brings us to the end of lesson number 14. I hope to see you in the next lesson. Jazakumullahu khairan. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد سبحان الله وبحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
لا إله إلا الله